Hey, Science 20s, we're going to take a look at some biogeochemical cycles today. If you watch the Amoeba Sisters video, it's probably better than the video I'm going to give you, but it's my voice instead of theirs, so you might like this one better. I don't know. Okay, so energy always flows in one direction. It's very tough to go have energy make a circle because we lose a lot of it, but matter is recycled. So that's a little bit different. Energy is not matter. Matter is like what we're made of. And the three different types of elements we're going to look at are carbon, nitrogen, and water. Well, water is a compound, but okay. The cycling of matter is influenced by things that are alive, especially the decomposers, and things that aren't alive, temperature and wind. Carbon, nitrogen, and water are the biggest drivers of everything in ecological systems. We may not think about nitrogen very much because we don't need it to live, but plants absolutely think about nitrogen. And carbon also is what everything on life is made of. And I think we can all agree that water is pretty important. So we're just going to look at two of these cycles today. Okay. The hydrologic cycle is the first one, and it's the water cycle, right? This refers to how water is cycled throughout the entire globe. There are four different terms. Evaporation, so that's how water turns from a liquid to a gas. Condensation, that's the opposite of that, a gas to a liquid. Precipitation, that's rain. Runoff, that runoff is like moving from a mountain to a stream. And transpiration, that's animals that actually breathe out water, or how water's moved from one point to another. This is really important because the water cycle allows things to move from one part of the world to the other by basically dissolving nutrients. So the water cycle is pretty important. Obviously, we wouldn't last very long without water, so the water cycle to us is super, super important. We're very lucky in Alberta and Canada. We have enormous amounts of fresh water, both from the mountains, the rivers, and deep underground and aquifers. All right, so let's talk a little bit some of the problems with the water cycle. Okay, how are we messing up the natural process of the water cycle? Well, a couple things. We've created things to help us with our environment, burning things and fertilizers and detergents. Those produce things like acid rain that are both nitric and sulfuric acid. So when we release those gases, they're absorbed by the water cycle and they are rained back down on us through precipitation. Sulfur comes from usually coal, some methane when it's burnt. And nitrogen comes from all of the things that burn gas. Nitrogen from like vehicles. Nitrous oxides are the smog around a city, and sulfur dioxide is really poisonous. It's a dangerous toxin. Those sulfurs and those nitrates, when they reach the clouds, they're absorbed by water droplets, and they basically turn into a type of acid rain. Now, it's not like if you go out in it right now, you'll melt into a pile of goo. But acid rain is enough to damage human structures, plants, and make animals very sick. And it gets everywhere. So one of the things that's really interesting is even though Canada per capita doesn't really produce a lot of pollution, that's wrong. Canada per capita produces actually a lot of pollution, but the amount of pollution that we make is relatively low compared to other very, very populous countries. But because of air currents, a lot of the pollutants wind up in the Arctic. So even though we really don't have anything to do with that, sort of, they do wind up in the Arctic. Okay, now the second cycle we're going to look at today is the carbon cycle. Everything that's alive is made of carbon. You, me, the trees, the bugs, and the slugs. It's all made of carbon. Okay. Now, you can recycle carbon very, very slowly, or you can recycle carbon very, very quickly. Rapid cycling occurs through cellular respiration and photosynthesis. So basically, by snacking on a carrot, we are taking we're taking the energy from the carrot and producing energy in our body, ATP, and then we breathe out carbon dioxide. So that carrot absorbed carbon dioxide through photosynthesis to make glucose. We snack on the carrot and we breathe out carbon dioxide. Now that cycle is perfect. A little bit extra might be made when things die. A little bit more might be absorbed by the ocean and by forests. But carbon, for the most part, is in a perfect cycle. Now, a very slow carbon cycle is when things die in the ocean or in bogs and over millions of years become oil and gas reserves. So they are trapped, and they really are trapped in areas that naturally they wouldn't come about and release their carbon back into the atmosphere. And that's what we're having with such a hard time right now, with everybody in the world kind of getting on the same page with climate change, is that carbon dioxide, if we have too much of it, is a very powerful greenhouse gas. And for millions of years, all of this excess carbon has been trapped deep under the earth, and humans have dug it up. Now, there are a lot of pros to carbon. We talked about that in the climate change lesson, right? A lot of people in the world rely on the carbon economy for their jobs. Obviously, we would have a rough time in the winter without carbon heating our homes, and it would suck if we couldn't drive cars and charge our phones, because our electricity and our transportation is run by carbon. But that's the benefit, and there are also problems with that. So we've already talked about the human impact of the carbon cycle, right? So we are re-releasing all of this stored carbon back into the environment, and that over time has had a negative impact, and it is slowly heating up the world. This isn't like rapid, this is slow, but we are seeing the effects of it right now. Also, the more forests that humans basically remove for farming or for expansion, those trees were once part of the carbon cycle that absorbed carbon. Now, you can't just, there's a lot of studies that came out that said, hey, we could just plant like millions of trees everywhere and boom, a climate change solved. And it would help a bit. I mean, it's always a good idea to plant more trees. But the problem is it's not balancing out the amount of carbon that the world is releasing. And we've already talked about this. This is a big problem that has a lot of people very, very far apart, and we kind of have to come to a middle. Well, you guys do, because I'll be dead. All right. So I'm going to leave the nitrogen cycle for tomorrow. It's a really cool cycle, but really confusing. Because nitrogen isn't something that humans need, right? Most of the air we breathe, 3/4 of the air is nitrogen, but our body doesn't use it. It's other things on Earth that use nitrogen that we need to survive. So I'm going to stop right there. Remember, the Ecological Project is due. I'll probably have another Google form you can try to test your knowledge on the water and the carbon cycle. And that's the lesson for today.